Welcome to Paranormal M, where the eerie and the unexplained come alive. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to follow our spine-tingling tales. Brace yourself for a supernatural journey. Missing 411, strange disappearances in the woods, and entering other realms through our own. I've begun to wonder if this person goes missing and ends up 50 miles away the next day phenomenon is actually a real thing, and perhaps has been for quite some time. You have otherwise skilled hikers or people familiar with the area they're in. They go to step off the trail, take a leak or pick a mushroom, or suddenly the landscape shifts and they're lost. They scream and yell, but nobody responds. Their friends later claim that they never heard them. The forest and the trees even look different. The birds don't even sound the same. Search parties are deployed, but the person ends up 50 miles away the next morning with no explanation on how they got there or how they traveled so quickly. Alternatively, otherwise responsible parents take their eyes off their toddler for a brief moment. Later the night, kid turns up 12 miles away with the story of how a light or a gnome led them to a special place. I teach survival and camping, and I guess now foraging. And these stories are more common than you'd think. Your first instinct is panic sets in and a person gets turned around, and sure, that happens. That's even happened to me. You fail to rein in that panic, and you don't take note of where you are, or where you've been, and suddenly you're even more lost. That I get. What I don't get is people following strange lights in the woods and turning up 2 days later many miles away with no recollection. Or people who seem to step into different time or place for an extended period of time, but then walk 5 feet and they're suddenly back on the trail. I studied Shakespeare in college. It always struck me as odd that his comedies had such a supernatural aura to them. Often his plays were very rooted in everyday life, in history, and very real things. So why would he have to delve into the fantastical? Northrop Frye, a literary critic, called some of the spaces in his comedies a green world. It's a place where the characters go and encounter mystical beings who help them solve their problems, or make their lives better. It is the realm of fairies, will-o'-wisps, and centaurs. All is resolved and characters return to daily life, drink, hit a wedding, and get married. I propose that this is a very real phenomenon that's existed for at least quite some time. That's as evidenced by Shakespearean writing. Oral histories by Native Americans speak of spiritual realms that are easy to access. As easy to access as walking down the street to go to the gas station. I believe it's more possible a supernatural phenomenon exists that's existed for an incredibly long time. And it's maybe only now in modern times that it's fallen by the wayside. Back in the day, it was like any other Tuesday. Gave birth to fairy realms, will-o'-wisps, gnomes, hobbitses, Shakespearean's green world, and many other myths. Going into the woods to meet supernatural creatures was such a regular-ass thing because it actually happened to people. It's not that Shakespeare gives us a supernatural setting in his comedies. It's that he gives us a very real thing that happened to people, like with everything else wrote. And today, it is a wild conspiracy theory that nobody will believe. But people who never get lost keep getting lost, meeting otherworldly beings and having unexplainable experiences. Why? My daughter keeps talking to something in my closet. Since my daughter, 18 months old, was able to wave, babble, or generally interact with people, she's been interacting with someone or something hiding in her closet. It started with waving. I made the joke that there's a ghost in there. At the time, I didn't actually believe it. Our dog likes to sleep in the closet, so I just figured that, she was waving to her. There was only one problem with that explanation. Anytime she waved, my dog was nowhere near the closet. Then she started babbling. She'd have full-on babble conversations with the closet. We brushed it off as her just being goofy. Sometimes she'd hold up toys to show the closet, then babble about it like she was doing show and tell. Now she's starting to use full sentences, and just this morning she looked over at the closet. "Hi, I see you," and then waved. This is the first coherent sentence that she said toward the closet. It's a little bit unnerving. And again, my dog wasn't in there. She's laying at the foot of the bed. The closet is a very small walk-in style closet. There's some built-in shelving up top, some plastic shelving that we added, and the door's off the hinges. It's leaning against the built-in shelving because it fell off and, we need to fix it. There isn't a single thing in there that looks like a human form. I've always been a bit sensitive to these things, but more so when I was a kid. I like to think that if there was something in the closet, I'd feel it. But now I'm doubting myself. For context, we live in a trailer built in the 80s, not even an old house. And as far as I know, the only deaths that have happened in the house were a couple of pets the previous owner had. And when my daughter talks to whatever's in there, she looks up like a tall person is standing there rather than a cat or a dog. Is this guy following me around? Our last home we moved down about 5 years ago was extremely haunted. The guy who built the house died in it about 30 years prior to us moving in. We're pretty sure that he wasn't stoked on the constant revolving door of young tenants. Within the first day of us moving in, it said my name out loud, started knocking on door frames, something that would pretty much continue almost 24/7 for a year. Just generally made us all uncomfortable. One night it even knocked a book off my mantle onto my head while I was sleeping. Left a pretty bad bruise. It would stop our laundry machines mid-wash or dry and open both the doors when we left the room. Scooted stuff around our kitchen. Often showed itself when we had guests and would scare them out of the house. Overall, very spooky. When we moved out, we moved into the house directly behind it. Our first day here, my roommates and I were chatting across the house when we heard a very distinct sound of books being picked up in a stack, dropped very deliberately onto the ground. A sound we both heard and reacted to. Said the same thing as to, what it was that we heard. We went into the living room and nothing was moved around. No books had fallen over, and in the 5 years we've been here, the only other strange thing that's happened was yesterday. Coincidentally, the day we started moving into a new house. I started to walk out the door when I heard a loud, snarling yap. Thought my dog had snapped at each other and started to fight behind me. It scared me so bad I jumped and whirled around instantly. My dogs were lying down, completely calm and away from each other, and now alerting to something behind me, like right where I heard the noise coming from. It's very weird and out of character for a new home. But I'm convinced it's our old ghost here to fuck with us one last time before we move further away on him. Has this ever happened to anybody who's lived in a haunted home and moved somewhere where that property touches their new one? We will find out. Breathing over my ear in a country house. This was my last summer in our country house because we were selling it. It was 2016 and I was 16 years old at that point. Usually I came there at the beginning of the summer and left at the end. But in the middle of the summer my parents and other relatives came and we all lived there in a big group. Then at the end of summer, everybody left. It was the day when my parents went back to another city and my sister and I left for another week with my grandparents in the country house. It was evening. Everything was as usual. I went for a walk with friends from neighboring areas. My grandmother went to a city because she likes to spend the night in the city. My grandfather and my sister stayed the last day or so to spend the night in the country house. Grandfather doesn't sleep in the house all summer, but he does go to bed in a gazebo on the street. I had to spend the night in the house with my sister. She slept on the first floor and I in the second. Went up to the second floor, calmly made my bed, and when I turned off the light it became a little bit creepy. But I quickly crawled under the covers and everything became normal. But for some reason I couldn't sleep for a very long time. I tossed and turned in bed until 2 a.m. Although I went to bed as usual, I went to bed at exactly 10 p.m. Couldn't fall asleep until 2 because all sorts of terrible thoughts. I'm lying on the roof with my head under the blanket and I'm getting hot. I'm about to throw off the blanket. Then I begin to hear heavy breathing right over my ear through the blanket. First I thought maybe it was me breathing and the sound on the blanket was reflected so loudly that I could hear myself so loudly. Maybe I heard my own breath. But the breathing above my ear didn't stop. I lay there for about 10 minutes listening to this breathing. Then it stopped. I lay under the blanket for a little longer. Then I jumped up sharply and looked around. There was no one there. So I decided to go to sleep on the first floor and fell asleep there peacefully. Nothing like this has ever happened to me again. And another note, it was definitely not sleep paralysis because I could move. I was lying facing the stairs and I would have seen somebody had they gone up and would have heard very loud doors opening in the house and very creaky floors. Doors were prohibited key. Anyone else ever experienced anything like this before? Let me start out by saying in 2004, something really tragic happened in my own home. Here's the background information. My ex was like a raging drug addict. He also was abusive as they come, so my words have no merit whatsoever. But anyways, he brings over this well-known heroin addict. They're partying well into the night. I'm currently a nursing student, so I wake up early. The next morning, I'm woken up by this man laid out in our front room. He's snoring like I've never heard anyone snore before. I later found out that he was in respiratory arrest. I even had to push my 3-month-old Rottweiler off of him. She was licking him profusely. She was even licking the inside of his mouth. I found that to be remarkably odd. Pulled the dog off of him, and being that I'm a first-year nursing student, I woke up my ex and said, "I think something's wrong with this guy. I think we have to call 911. He screams in my face how he's got a mass amount of drugs in the house and there won't be any sort of cop calling shit. I had to get to my school to take the AP and a microtest, so I leave. I'm gone literally 3 hours. When I get home, all hell breaks loose. My ex is frantic. He's yelling at me to do CPR on this heroin addict. I say I don't have any protection for my mouth, so I'm not giving rescue breaths. This was well before they changed CPR to compressions only. I drop down, go to check his breathing, but at first glance I can see his eyes are wide open, pupils fully dilated and fixed. He's catatonic, meaning he's blue. His lips are blue, his nose is blue, and this guy was cold to the touch. Even a tad rigid. I knew CPR wasn't going to bring him back, but I start compressions and sternum rubs. My ex runs across the street to my neighbor's house, and he also takes my phone with him. He's gone like 3 minutes, which seems like an eternity at this point. It leaves me all alone to deal with this guy. Then I hear sirens. The neighbors must have called 911. Paramedics arrive and break out everything they can to bring him back. They even brought out Narcan, which is an opiate overdose medication, but nothing worked. Apparently they knew this man, because I overheard the one medic say, "Isn't this the 6th time now we've brought this one back?" It didn't register till much later, but he wasn't afforded 7th. He was pronounced dead on arrival. You'd think this would make my ex clean up his act, But it didn't. Well, a year later, I finally escaped this turmoil. We split for good, thank God. It was 7 years of hell on earth itself. But that's a story for another day. This has to do with what happens in the exact spot of my living room some 2 years later. Well, this man dies right on my living room floor. Now try and picture the layout. One-story ranch living rooms as soon as you enter the home. To the left of the living room is a hallway. That's where there's a full bathroom and 3 bedrooms. Anyways, so I'm on the couch watching TV. Get up to go to the bathroom. On my way to the restroom, I'm stopped dead in my tracks. I feel this energy force enter through my chest. Every hair stands up on end and I even smell it. I felt this weird sensation through my chest. It stayed for 10 seconds and then I felt a pulling sensation out of my back. It's summer, so we don't have static electricity until winter. I tried to rationalize this with every theory I can. I didn't get cold like everybody always claimed when a ghost is present. It was energy. I've never had this happen before, and I've never had it happen again. Anybody else ever experienced this, or am I the only one? Ronald McDonald House, and something in my room. There was a noise and a thing in my room at Ronald McDonald House. My daughter, who's also a Redditor, suggested I post the story here. After chewing on it for several weeks, I'm not really sorting out what I believe about the situation. I've chosen to follow her suggestion. I neither believe nor disbelieve in much of anything outright. Typically look for what answer is more likely than not, and then make my decisions from there. I've had what I have accepted to be paranormal encounters. I've had encounters that most certainly seemed paranormal in the moment, but turned out to be very boring and sadly dismissible. On this, though, I think I'm trying to find any other plausible answer, because this was much too much to dismiss, but also too much to be real. My daughter has fairly severe scoliosis and has some comorbidities, and her care requires us to travel out of state where there's a specialist that can treat all of her conditions as one. As a result, we stay at Ronald McDonald House during our stays. We've done so for many years without incident. It's a lovely alternative to hotels, and when things get heavy, sometimes it's nice to be alone, but still with other people who understand the fear and struggle, so I always felt comfortable and safe there. We are, unfortunately, there far more often than we would like. This particular trip was for a spinal fusion. It was going to be complicated and involved. We were prepared to be there for quite a while. The room was lovely, bigger than our usual rooms there. The only real difference aside from how nice it was that it was next to what I assume was the large old heating and cooling units for the building. One door away from the fire escape stairwell. I'd never stayed in this area. The building had been renovated and a very large addition wing was added. We were on the old side. The heating and cooling sounded like a jet engine. No exaggeration, like when it kicked on, and it did occasionally rattle. Well, not only that, but rattled the walls and the whole house. And by the way, this will be important information for later. It was so loud that I wondered how families with struggling children could tolerate the constant rumbling noise. I really can't express how very loud it was, and that'll be important later too. So remember the rattling and the loudness. Our first night in the room, after we got settled into bed, the bathroom light turned itself on. The light's motion activated, and I noticed later that the motion sensor was sort of angled, so you almost had to walk diagonally through the door to trigger it. It wasn't something that could have been impacted by light from the TV or something like that. I found it odd, but thought maybe the outrageous rumbling could have somehow caused it. I was too tired to care. So we made a joke of it and fell asleep. Her pre-op appointment started very early and ran long. The next night, at least nothing exciting happened. The following night, I noticed an odd sound, a like scratching on the wall, but different, more like a scraping sound. But it sounded like multiple objects scraping at the same time. Then the bathroom light would turn on again. This time it really didn't seem related to the bomber jet taking off right outside my walls. It really sounded like it was in the room. I knew my nerves were shot, and I knew I was exhausted. I knew my mind was already coming up with a million scary things to worry about. So I convinced myself it was just the old pipes and ducts and that obnoxious machine being so close. So I fell asleep, and the next day was surgery day. Surgery was rough. A few challenges ensued, and she ended up needing a blood transfusion. A few other things too. And I point out these issues because I'm still trying to gaslight myself into believing that the most likely scenario for the rest of the story is that I was very tired. And I was in the older part of the building, with the equivalent of an aircraft carrier outside. I think I really want to believe that. Well, I went to her room alone that night. More exhausted than I think I've ever been in my life. I needed to be back to the hospital in a few hours, but after such a long and terrifying day, knowing she was resting peacefully and my presence would keep her awake, I chose to get some rest. I poured myself into bed, and I was just getting settled when the scratching started again. I was too tired to care. Then, the clicking. I don't know how else to describe it. Think of the sound of a smallish dog with 2 long toenails that they would make on a wood floor. Similar to that, but not exact. Seemed to be coming from the same area near the bathroom as before. I ignored it, and again, assuming it was just the machines. Then on the other side of the room near the other bed where a refrigerator was, the clicking started there. Then the large reusable bag on top of the mini fridge that held our dry groceries rattled as though it had been bumped or jostled. Then the scraping. At this point I had to take notice. It wasn't changing based on the rumbling noise, it was just moving. Right on cue, the bathroom light clicked on. I can't properly describe how physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted I was after everything we were dealing with. And in the most annoyed mom voice ever, I said out loud, "I'm way too tired for this bullshit tonight. Knock it off." I wasn't talking to anybody in particular. I just think I needed to say it out loud. It stopped. I fell into restless sleep for a few hours. After the first night, I began taking pictures, just to post to my social media stories with some snarky caption about the obnoxious bathroom light, so I was able to document every time something happened. Mostly for my own entertainment, as I kept people updated on my daughter. I didn't see anything unusual in the photos, other than a light nobody had been near for hours, basically, deciding to be on after a series of other weird events. A few more nights of scraping sounds here or there in the room. The light turning on, but nothing further, at least until after 6 nights in the hospital. That's when she was released. Got her to her room and situated as comfortably as I could in her bed. After 2 nights in her bed, we figured out that it was increasing her pain, so we moved her to the pull-out couch bed. That's where she had more support. She could use the arms as bed rails, giving her freedom to move herself a bit. Her bed became sort of a catch-all for anything that we didn't want on the floor. So there were hospital items, adaptive equipment, medical supplies, and a few extra blankets and pillows piled here and there on the bed. My bed was closest to the bathroom. Hers was closest to the window across the room with the nightstand between. The fridge and groceries were at the front of that bed. The couch bed was against the opposite wall toward the foot of the beds. You could see just about every inch of the room from all 3 beds, except for the bathroom, which could only be seen from the couch bed. This night in particular, the scraping started again, along with the clicking and tapping sound. She heard it too. Then the bathroom light turned on. We both remarked on the situation, and I explained that I'd been hearing it all along, trying to dismiss it. She had seen the bathroom light each time when she was there, but now the clicking was more like audible or forceful. I don't know the word to use because I still don't know what it was, but then the sound was back near the groceries. We're both trying to ignore it, Certain the combination of fatigue, emotion, and everything else that was causing our minds to add scenarios that weren't really necessary. You know that feeling you get when you know you need to turn around, but suddenly you just don't want to? I'm sure there's a name for it, but that's when I've got the explanation for what happened next. Turned my head toward a regular bed where the extra belongings were stored, and I don't really know what I saw. I just know I saw it. My eyes were well adjusted to the dim light, and I was tired, but certainly aware and awake. I was sober. My mental state was fantastic since my daughter was safe with me. Procedure was over and we're moving forward. I feel like that's important to note, given that I truly want to understand what comes next. A head slowly came up from between the wall and the bed, where the extra blankets were stacked. That's probably maybe 8 or 10 inches above the mattress. It was hairless. The skin was an unnatural pinkish hue, like the color of a healed burn, I guess I could describe it. But more peachish. Was that a word, peachish? The ears and eyes didn't make sense. The eyes were dark and abnormally large, taking up an unreasonable amount of the face. I don't recall seeing a nose, and there could have been one, but I didn't notice or I don't recall. I did notice that the mouth was more like a long, closed slit than angled down at the sides. I didn't notice any lips of any sort. The head was disproportionate to glimpse of the shoulders I was seeing, like how toddlers' heads seem way too big for their bodies. The head and shoulders were similar in size, with the shoulders only slightly wider. Whatever was draped over them was ill-fitting and dark, probably black. The head rose up as though it was slowly standing, then slowly lowered back down, as though it saw me watching and chose to hide again. The thing is, it didn't make any sort of acknowledgement of me seeing it at all. I didn't feel any sense of doom or anything, just an unsettling feeling that I had very clearly had seen something in a room, in the same area as the clicking and scraping. Whatever it was didn't seem to even care that we were even there or present. The movements weren't fast or jerky, it just seemed to slowly stand and then lower itself back down. I didn't see this out of the corner of my eye, I was looking directly at it. Once it lowered back down again, there was no more sounds or disturbance that night, nor the 3 nights we were there. I was afraid of scaring my daughter. No, I couldn't move her even if I wanted. During this whole ordeal, the elevator was broken. Couldn't get her down from her 3rd-story room. And to learn from the people at the desk what I was going to do if there was an emergency. Knowing under emergency circumstances, we would just use the stairwell that was close to her room, but the kid couldn't move. She was in blinding pain, fused from her skull to her rump. Just getting her to the bathroom was an entire production. We were stuck where we were. Whatever this was hadn't caused any harm, it was just unsettling. I was far more terrified of just trying to move my daughter and all of her medical and adaptive equipment out of her room. Where do we even go? Ronald McDonald House has a wait list in summer. There's no other rooms. Hotels in the area run $200 a night anywhere near the hospital. So that was out. Chose not to tell her what I saw until the drive home. I'd noticed very few other odd things missing from our belongings, but I assumed I'd just misplaced them in my exhaustion. I trusted that no one from the facility was stealing. Few of the missing items were stored next to several $100s cash that I didn't want to carry on my person. I know leaving it in the room isn't ideal, but that's what I did. If someone was coming in and stealing, I would assume they would take the items of value or straight-up cash, not random snack food or little trinkets. Certain I had somehow lost my mind and misplaced them, I mentioned it to my daughter each time something new vanished, kind of like a ha-ha, see how tired Mom is. I'm so dumb I misplaced one singular package of gummies today without even remembering touching it. I can't stress how hard I was trying to convince myself that everything was normal and could be explained away. On the very long drive home, I told her the full story, mainly as a distraction to keep her from focusing on the discomfort of being shoved into, then trapped for 12 hours in a very small car without being able to bend. I told her everything, day by day, the missing items, the sound, the light, finally the figure. She asked me to describe it, and I said no. Felt crazy. Certainly didn't want to open my mouth and confirm it. Wanted her to laugh with me and tell me how tired I must have been, so I just could get a mother-daughter moment of reminding her how happy I was that I was there with her and I didn't mind a bit. That's how the story needed to end for me, so I could go on with life and forget about it. Instead, she started asking very specific questions. I answered her honestly, but reluctantly. I won't lie to her, so she knew I would answer. She asked very particular questions about the size and shape of the head and shoulders, the eyes, the mouth, the tapping, the scraping that she also heard and when items went missing. She then said she believes that I saw a crawler. I didn't know what that was. I'm not certain I fully understand what it is now. She asked me what other entrances were near her room, because she didn't ever really know. She was in the hospital most of the time, and when she was there, she didn't venture out except to go to the appointments and only left in one direction. So I told her about the old stairwell, one door down from ours. She went on to tell me a variety of things, then looked up more information and stories on them. I suppose the details fit, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. For reference, my daughter just turned 18 while recovering from surgery in Ronald McDonald House, so she isn't prone to storytelling or wild imagination. She's a young woman, well-educated, and really likes cryptids. She studies weird stuff, and I think it's great. She doesn't partake in any mind-altering substances, though obviously was on pain meds and, following the procedure and all that. Help! I'm being tormented by a ghost. The lights in my bathroom flicker, even when I screw them in more. Lights in my bedroom have turned on and off by themselves. I often see something in my peripheral. Whenever I look at it, it disappears, but it seems like it's wearing some kind of black robe. I feel and hear 3 gentle taps on my temple like every now and then, and usually when I'm trying to fall asleep. It's unsettling having this much activity lately, especially since the activity had previously declined. Here's a little background. I live at home with my family. I'm in my childhood bedroom in the basement. When I was a teenager, I was really stupid. At one point, I think 2018 if I had to guess, me and my friends had a seance with a Ouija board in my room. We made contact with something they called, Jason. Told us things that we knew were lies, like that it died in this house. There's no previous owners. Stuff like that. We said goodbye and thought that was the end of it. Keep the Ouija board in the hallway closet. After that, there'd be random cold spots in my room, like you'd be sweating from the space heater until you sat on the bed and it would be super cold. There was also this super uneasy feeling in the hall where the closet was. Then at some point, 2021 I think, I started seeing this thing. It was like it used to be a woman, but there was black instead of a mouth and eyes, and it was smiling literally from ear to ear. I would always pretend I didn't see it. I'd walk past and go about my business. I eventually told some friends in 2023 about that creepy thing and explained how it was next to the Ouija board. We made a plan to bury the board. I took the board to her place, she gave me some sage and tried to light it over the Ouija board. But the spring in the lighter shot straight out, leaving the lighter completely useless. I did get another lighter and lit it away from the board, cleansed the board. Then we talked about where to bury it. We saw a very young kid standing in the street, just staring at us. We went to see where his parents were, but as soon as we walked, he ran. We watched him go into a house that my friend thought was abandoned. My friend swears that he was a demon, but I think she was just paranoid. We left the board on the sidewalk to go get lunch, but we were really stupid. When we came back, you guessed it was gone. Figured since the board was out of my possession, I was safe. Went home, cleansed my area very thoroughly. I stopped seeing that terrifying apparition, so I figured all was well, even though I still couldn't shake the being watched feeling. There's a lot of antiques in my home, so I figured that it was possible that something from one of those was just watching. A lot of people who don't know about the Ouija incident have said that they feel like they're being watched or something isn't right in my room. I would just ignore it. It wasn't bugging me too much. Cleanse my room anyway. Just an eerie feeling and a light flicker here and there seemed harmless enough. But now it's getting ridiculous. I'm having trouble sleeping because I'm seeing something moving around my bed and I wake up several times around 3 or 4 a.m. What do I do? Any knowledge, advice, or similar stories are greatly appreciated. I'm out of ideas. Hearing voices near Olympic National Park. I was just recently at a small cabin tucked away in the woods, right on the edge of the Olympic National Park. It was just me and my pup. The cabin sits on the edge of the cliff, has a creek running below that's accessible via a steep trail on the property. As I was walking down the path to the cabin, I heard what I thought were people or children. It sounded like they were down at the creek playing. I tried to peer over the edge to see them, but I couldn't immediately see anything and just was ready to take a nap. So I just assumed it was somebody else from the property using the creek. It did give me a weird feeling though. I just tried to brush it off. A few hours later, I got up and took a chair outside of the same area where I was walking to sit and read for a while. I heard a similar higher-pitched noise or voice sound, but not quite to the same degree as earlier. I stopped reading and started paying close attention to see if I could identify it, but it never presented itself in the same way again. I heard a tree creaking a bit, lots of very tall trees in the area, but it wasn't the same noise or nearly as loud as what I heard before. I really just wanted it to be the trees. Went back to the cabin, and a while later, picked up a notebook where visitors have signed and written little stories. I flipped to one page from April 2024 that reads, "We did have one experience that left us a bit shook. A partner went out to the car, and when he was returning, he thought he heard my voice calling out to him from the creek. We started to go to it because the voice was so familiar, but I saw, opened the door, and asked where he was going. For those who follow, he said it smelled like low tide and rust. At this point, I really freaked out because I was trying to justify my experience. Somebody else had a similar experience too. What do you think it was?" I heard my front door open. So I'm with my brother, staying over at my new apartment. It's in the house from the 50s or 60s. We were making a song for her dad. After we're going to bed, I was on the bed. I was chilling on social media and then I hear my front door open. I felt a chill go to my stomach, my cat looking in the hall as well. I slowly got up, making my way down the stairs to the front door. There's nothing there. Nobody there. Just a random sound of my front door opening. Without even opening. And at 2 a.m. too. So now me and my brother are going to sleep together this night. I don't know what it could have been. I live in a neighborhood away from the stores. A little bit away, but still relatively close to the rest. I live on the second floor. The landlord renovated this to be an apartment that he rents out. I have a walk-in way to set off, take my shoes off at the first floor and then go up the stairs to the second, then a hallway and you see my bedroom to the first floor, or rather the first room on that floor, then the kitchen, bathroom, and so on. So I don't know. Strange encounter. On New Year's about 11 or 12 years ago, when I was around 5 or 6 years old, my parents drove me to a mountain to watch the fireworks exploding in the sky above the city. It was very dark, but the fireworks were beautiful. Everything seemed to be going to plan. My parents and I were staring out in the distance, countless colors filling the air. Out of nowhere, I felt a cold breeze. Started to become nervous. When I turned around, something was staring at me from the bushes. I knew this because the eyes of it would light up every time a firework exploded. I remember this part vaguely, mostly because I was very young, but I did know to tell my father. He didn't seem to be bothered telling me it's most likely a boar or a small animal. I reluctantly agreed. So we continued to watch the scene. On the way back to the car, I saw something big and white move away from that bush. It was like a big cow with no black spots. Kind of hard to describe. I was in shock, but decided to keep my mouth shut for the rest of the ride. Figured I would ruin the moment with my imagination, quote-unquote. I confessed to having a big imagination when I was small, but I knew this time it wasn't my imagination. The next morning I told the story to my grandmother. She said it was probably my imagination, because I was tired and it was well beyond my bedtime. With me not wanting to be bothered by thinking about it, I agreed. This was my first encounter with that thing. 2 years later, I already forgot about it and moved on. But on one evening, my dad drove me to my grandparents, on his side of the family. He drove me to their house. They live about an hour and a half away from our house, and it's way more inland. And by the way, this happened in Croatia. Our house was on the shore and around the city of Trogir. My grandparents living in a more mountainous and inland region of Promena. So we were driving about halfway to my grand's house, and I decided I was bored playing with my toys. So I figured I'd pass the time by looking outside the window, observing the nice nature. At this point, we passed through a village which hasn't been at its best in a long time, due to the Yugoslav War. It was always kind of uncanny to me, staring at the road ahead but peeked to the side window. There was more trees and skinny dirt paths leading to the locals' farms on the way. Then it happened again. Nothing was out of the ordinary. That's from one of the dirt paths, something big, white, and wide. It just stood there. The exact second I saw it, realization hit me. I remembered my first encounter, closed my eyes, and all this happening in the span of a few seconds. This time I saw it clearly, with enough daylight available to me to make out its appearance. As I said before, it was white and smoky clear. It wasn't ghost-like clear, but seemed to not really be in a solid form either. Its body was also very strange. It's pretty tall, around maybe 11.5 feet in height, having a pretty unproportional body to its height. The body shape was almost cartoon-like, sideways, oval, and round, kind of like a snowman whose body is the only one like a big snowball with the smaller one as the head. That's the best way I can describe it. This time, though, I couldn't make out any facial features or eyes. After I closed my eyes, my dad asked me what was going on. I told him the truth. I saw something strange. I described it quickly with my voice trembling a bit. He said that it sounded like a cow to him. Now, that's very plausible because there's lots of cows in the area, but it was way too big. I tried not to think about it after we arrived, but it stuck with me for at least a week. Eventually, my parents and I moved away to Germany. I completely forgot about it. My latest and last sighting of it was about 5 years ago. That's when I was 12 or 13. It was the end of summer vacation. Time to drive to the airport and fly back to Germany. That summer was strange already. My dad's car was broken, so we flew to Croatia and rented a car, which was pretty new to me. It was a Corolla or a Clio or something with no real power in its motor because I remember the car audibly struggling to drive up a steep road. Anyways, we got up at around 2 in the morning. Our flight was scheduled for 6 a.m. We got ready and my grandpa drove us there. That way he can turn the rented car back in when they open again. Well, we drove for about 45 minutes. It was approaching 3 a.m. And I know this is very cliche, but I'm not kidding about this. I was looking out the window like last time. I saw it again. Honestly, I don't remember this very well, but perhaps I truly was very tired and saw things, or was in a half-asleep state. But it looked real, and again I kept silent about it, until recently. I only remembered my encounters with it when we drove on that countryside. Recently, some friends of mine and I were telling strange experiences that we had in our lives. That's when I remembered about it again, decided to write this post. Every time I tell this story, I get tears in my eyes. It's honestly pretty strange. Like, I don't know what that is. Now I want to reassure the authenticity of my words and that this is not a hoax. I don't want to start a debate or something, just want to tell somebody about some strange things I saw. Did somebody else see something similar to this? Or has a possible explanation to this? Let me know. If I see it again or realize I forgot something, I'll make sure to update the post, respond to anybody who's interested. Something was watching my horse and me. Around 2014, in the summer in a small provincial town in Ecuador, I was working in my father's farm. He was dedicated to livestock, so every weekend after school, he helped with daily tasks such as feeding to the cows and going over to make sure that they're not missing or having any problems. Well, one Saturday she did a routine afternoon batch check. That's around 3 p.m. For some reason, I couldn't do it early, so I rode my horse called Loco and went to see them in the afternoon. It was a trip, from 50 minutes to an hour because there was a shortage of pasture on the farm. We had to rent a virgin piece of land nearby. The outward journey and the batch check passed without incident. It was around 5:30 in the afternoon, so I started the return journey and 30 minutes back home, and I felt strange wind on my body. I was skeptical until that moment, but for some strange reason that feeling made me think something bad's gonna happen. Almost instantly, I noticed that Loco began to struggle with the reins, something strange since he was a noble and calm horse. However, he began to move his ears abruptly. His hair curled and his body struggled against the side of the road, as if it wanted to dodge something and run. With all my strength, I tried to control it with the reins. While that was happening, my head involuntarily turned to the right, and out of the corner of my eye saw like a black silhouette of maybe 1.5 meters. It disappeared from the fence that surrounded us, made the undergrowth tremble, breaking everything when it disappeared. It didn't run, it didn't fly, it simply vanished. Could not have been an animal, since it didn't emit any screech or typical sound when an animal or person flees. Just vanished without, really saying anything. It made a huge rumble of dry undergrowth, though. And while that happened, in the 1,000th of a second, my hands went numb from the force I applied on the wheel, and Loco simply started running in wheels. Still confused, held on with the little strength I had left, so as not to fall and injure myself. After minutes of intense running, Loco finally stopped his gallop. I went down to drink some water in the stream. I noticed that my eyes burned like hell. They were burning like they were bathed in pepper spray, without ever taking any herbs or stung my eyes or my sweat or anything. When I got home and unsaddled my horse, my mom asked me what had happened to my eyes. I simply replied that it was my sweat. It wasn't necessary for her to be alarmed that way. But when I saw myself in the mirror, I noticed that my eyes were crying blood. There's not a single white space in my eyes. There's nothing more than 2 meatballs filled with red as vivid as the blood of a slaughtered bull. That alarmed me too much, instantly related it back to the black thing that I saw. It should be noted that my doctor couldn't find a medical or logical explanation about what happened to my eyes, and no medication helped. My eyes remained that way for 2 months. Telling this to my mom and brother just froze. My brother went the next day to check the area where I had that sighting. He told me that there were no trails, roads, or at least one broken branch. Everything was clean. It's just weird. It's been 8 years and I remember it vividly. I haven't been back to that place since. Loco died a year ago. Sad to know that he was my partner and the only one who experienced that with me. I miss you, Loco. A selection of ghostly paranormal experiences. I'll preface this by saying that I grew up in a very spiritual family. My mom especially had tons of stories about ghosts and spirits that she'd encountered in her life. When I was around 7 years old, my family moved into a new house. From the get-go, my mom said there was a spirit in the house, but apparently she was friendly. It was a little old lady called Elsie. If you look up our address online, it said the previous tenant was named Elsie. Mom was never afraid, but was adamant that Elsie was looking out for her as my mom was diagnosed with cancer a few months after the move. On nights where my stepdad had gone out for drinks with his friend and all of us children were asleep, Mom would see a shadow pause by her doorframe before disappearing, almost as if Elsie was looking in to check on her. I remember a specific time where my family went on holiday. My uncle was house-sitting as he had 2 dogs. He called my mom in obvious panic, claiming that there was a little old woman at the top of the stairs calling his name. My mom, very calmly, told him that it was just Elsie and she was harmless. But if he was really worried, to carry one of my mom's crystals in his pocket, politely asked Elsie to leave him alone. As far as I'm aware, he wasn't bothered by her again. My mom had a photo of her grandfather displayed on our landing. Told us that if we ever lost anything, we just needed to go to the photograph and ask great-granddad for help finding the missing item. It didn't matter if you'd been, searching for lost items for days without fail. Asking great-granddad would always result in you finding the thing the next half hour, even if you'd already looked everywhere. My mom died of cancer in 2011. That was when I was 13. Since then, I've felt her presence around me in many different situations. I never see her, but I've felt her sitting on the end of my bed to watch over me when I'm ill, or just like she would be alive and I was unwell. I don't think this counts as a ghost story, but she leaves me feathers and other signs and I need a little bit of encouragement. On the day of my graduation from university, I was upset. She was missing a day that she'd say that she was massively looking forward to. As I walked out of the ceremony, a feather landed on the top of my graduation cap. If I'm just upset or something, just talking about her, lights will flicker and sometimes even blow entirely. As far as actual ghost sightings goes, my current house is haunted by a ghost that we've called Clive. I've read somewhere that you shouldn't name ghosts as you can give them more power, but Clive was a joke name that kinda stuck. Since moving in, myself and my sisters have all heard footsteps from empty rooms. My youngest sister's had more than one friend stay over who's woken up in the middle of the night and been adamant that a tall man has been standing in a corner staring at them. Whenever this has happened, I should explain that we haven't mentioned anything about Clive to these people. I'm the only person who lives here that has seen Clive with my own eyes. On 2 occasions, I've woken up to somebody calling my name and saw a tall man walking from one end of the bedroom to the other before disappearing. On another occasion, I was sitting in my back garden having a cigarette. Our back door is glass. You can see through the living room down the hallway. The door to the kitchen is in the hallway. And that's all the way to the front door. I was looking into the house and saw a tall man walk from the bottom of the stairs, went through the hallway and into the kitchen. I assumed it was my then boyfriend, so when I'd finished my cigarette, I went to the kitchen expecting to see him there, but it was empty. My boyfriend was in my bedroom upstairs and was adamant that he'd been there the whole time, hadn't been downstairs. Luckily, I've never felt afraid or uncomfortable when it comes to Clive, but I have had to ask spirits to leave a couple of times as they can scare my cat. So that's just a few of my, me and my mom's experiences. Sorry if this isn't the place to talk about the signs that my mom leaves me or the spiritual element of this, but thank you if you've taken the time to read this so far. Stay safe, everybody. Good vibes to you all. Unexplained event in bakery. Just a little backstory. I work in the bakery department for a well-known company. And in my store, there's 3 people involved. My supervisor, we'll name her Lindsay. My coworker, we'll name her Megan. And me. I'd just clocked into work, about 1:30 p.m. I walked into the break room, got a drink, and saw Lindsay sitting down on her lunch break. I said hi and then walked back to the bakery department. Fast forward to about 2:03 p.m. Lindsay was still up front, maybe finishing her break or taking care of some business, and Megan and I were still making our way back from the bakery, on the other end of the building. I was walking around after just finishing some tasks. That's when I quickly glanced back at Megan. She was wearing her red shirt and her white hat, kneeling down over by two fans that sit next to her three big ovens. She seems to be wiping the fans down or something when I noticed Lindsay, right next to her with her white hat on and black shirt on. I noticed that she had it on earlier when I first came to work when I saw her on her lunch break. I thought to myself, oh, okay. Lindsay must have finished with whatever she was doing up front and came back to the bakery. Not really thinking too much of it, I turned back and went back with my next task. Just then, Megan comes up to me and asks, "Have you seen Lindsay?" I heard her voice calling her name just a moment ago. She wasn't there when I looked. I said, "Thought she was with you by the fans. I just saw her next to you." She said, "No, I was alone." Feeling spooked, I messaged Lindsay. I asked where she was. "Up front, why? Everything all right?" I have no clue what that was. We were both shook in the moment and we were left wondering what just happened. If you guys reading this have any ideas, please let me know. I asked around the store with people who worked in the bakery. They have some stories too, such as shadow figures and things moving and falling and opening and closing, lights turning on and off on their own. And it's true, I've seen lights flicker in shadows as I worked alone. An unsettling and unexplained experience. When I was around 16 years old, my auntie was heavily pregnant with my youngest cousin. She had 2 kids and the third was on the way this night. It was the night that she had been placed into the hospital for birth. I had to babysit the 2 eldest cousins while she was in. They were asleep upstairs in their bedroom. I decided to place myself in the living room downstairs to watch telly and be with the dogs. It was getting late. I decided I'll get a few more hours of sleep in. As I got comfortable with both dogs with me on the sofa, I started to drift to sleep. As I was almost about to fall asleep, the border collie shot upright, tail stiff and straight, staring at the door of the stairs. I took no notice of this and told him to get sleep, as I may have been a car on the street late at night. But as soon as I said this, I heard the most petrifying, loudest banging I've ever heard. It was as if somebody with boots was slamming their feet running up the stairs. When I say running, I mean literally sprinting up. Shot up mid-panic attack, opened the door to allow both dogs to run up in case somebody had broke in. Followed quickly behind to run into the kids' room where they were both fast asleep, dogs staring into the corner of the room. All of the rooms were empty. No one was inside apart from us. I woke both the kids up and brought them downstairs to sleep on the sofa with me. I also got both dogs in the living room too. I didn't sleep after this, and I waited till my aunt and uncle both got home. I mentioned this only briefly to them, and my uncle says it's a common occurrence. What could this be? Could this be malicious? Paid visit on Xmas Eve. My family and I were visiting relatives in New Jersey. That was for Christmas in 2018. We stayed at a hotel in the suburbs. We just finished cooking and baking for a Christmas feast at a relative's place, and we got dropped off at a hotel. We were staying there to freshen up before attending Christmas Eve Mass and eating dinner. When we got to the hotel, my mom and I were making our way towards the elevator from the lobby. Saw what looked to be an elderly Caucasian man, not very tall in stature, maybe 5'2", wearing a coat and a gray tweed golf cap. He walked past us, entered one of the elevators. I didn't really get a good glimpse of what his face looked like, but once I set foot into the elevator, I was shocked to see that he wasn't inside. I instantly got goosebumps. I asked my mom to confirm if she had seen the man as well. What she did. My brother and dad followed us into the elevator but claimed they didn't notice the man. Once the elevator got to her floor, I bolted to her room as fast as I could. There was a large portrait on the wall not too far from where the elevators were of an elderly man, presumably the owner of the hotel. My mother suggested that it could have been his spirit visiting the hotel on Christmas Eve. I could have sworn he saw a physical person walk into the elevator that night. I didn't feel like the spirit had an evil aura or anything like that. Some type of spirit in our house. We don't know what to do. I live in a student house in Lincolnshire with 4 others. We all range from 20 to 22. So it all started around September 23rd. Started with knocking, walking, and just generalized noises. We initially didn't think anything of it. Put it down to having thin walls to our neighbors. It then all started to ramp up a little bit. One of the girls started to have dreams about the spirit that had chains around her hands, start to approach her more and more every night. One night she had this dream. The spirit was right in front of her. When she looked down, she also had chains around her wrists. She remembers her nan who had passed appearing in her dream and telling her to get out. Started screaming it, and she woke up in cold sweats, scratches all down her legs and back. From here on is when things started to get worse. Lights started to flicker, doors opening and closing on their own. Felt it was getting worse. Things happen all over the house, such as the living room, which is directly underneath my bedroom. It's always very cold. It has a weird feeling. Feels like you're being watched in there. One of the girls, when we first moved in, went in there and had a panic attack. That was because she felt like somebody else was in there with her, but she couldn't see them. She also mentioned that there was a very heavy, unsettling atmosphere in there. My bedroom seems to be the hot spot. That's directly above the living room. But noises, moving objects, things going missing. When people also come in and out of my room, they're hit with an overwhelming sense of unease and fatigue. It's like all the energy's been sucked out of them. They start to feel ill, like headaches and severe abdominal pain. There's also been times where I've been in bed in the early morning, like 1 or 2 a.m., and I've heard noises in from my bedroom, like objects moving like footsteps and whatnot right behind me while I'm trying to sleep. One particular time was when I could hear kids running around and laughing in my bedroom. Couldn't have been the neighbors because of how early it was in the morning. I've also had nightmares and dreams about these spirits, and so has one of the other girls. One dream and nightmare particularly scared me. Dreamt that I got raped by 2 men, and less than 3 days later I did. Another time, I vividly remember one night I was in bed rolled over and there was a huge black mass in the corner of my room. Near it, sitting on my chair, a white glow appeared. I remembered hearing like a faint whisper, "Don't be scared, I'm here to protect you." For some reason, I remember his name being Michael, but I don't know how I got that name. Just as they appeared, both went, and then an unsettling, nervy feeling. I'm not the only one who've seen apparitions in the house. One of the other girls saw what appeared to be a girl's dress and feet in her doorway, but when she looked up, nothing was there. Also been smells of rotting eggs in only one part of my room, as well as other strange occurrences, like feeling watched all the time. There was another time where we're all sitting in the room together just chatting, and all of a sudden we felt like we were being watched. Somebody made a comment saying this, and the next thing you know, I felt like I was being choked, but nothing was there. There was a strange pressure on my chest, and I just felt I couldn't breathe. All of us in the house have had an influx of panic attacks and just a lot of bad luck shared between us. We've also had a common share of electronics playing up, doors opening and closing on their own, the TV turning itself on in the middle of the night, our Alexas randomly starting to play, and coincidentally, it's always been the same, or rather, been the Sam Fender song Getting Started, which freaks us all out even more. One of the lads that lives with us also felt and experienced some of these things, decided to get his nan involved to help. When she first walked into her house, bleach was thrown at her. It was clear to see that she was wearing all black. She's very in touch with that side of things. Cleansed the house and blessed it. Seemed like it had initially worked too. And this was in October. About 2 days after things started up again. It's just been getting worse ever since. Noises and scratching, objects being moved again, and so forth. Seems like the center of activity is my bedroom. Always cold and has always had this eerie feeling. And I'm a student. I go home for the holidays. In the summer, and this summer, whilst I've been away, I've allowed one of my friends to stay in my room. As soon as she moved in there, she was struck with severe allergies, which I also experienced at the beginning of the term when I was first moving in. The others in the house have noticed behavioral changes with her since being in my bedroom. She was living with us previously. They've also mentioned this when I'm there. I'm also subject to these changes myself, becoming more irritable, quick mood swings, panic attacks, and anxiety. I have a rosary up in my bedroom to try to prevent anything, and every time I go to touch it, it's boiling hot, almost burning hot. We're just curious as to what our next steps are. We've been thinking about getting a priest in, but our only concern is that some of us in the house haven't been baptized or christened. Plus, we don't even know what type of spirit this is. It's really starting to scare us. Since being in the house is a lot of trauma, things have happened to us. Which may be a coincidence, but everything's making us think otherwise. Any help or insights would be greatly appreciated.